We got this London game with the Falcons at the Jaguars. Jags favored by 3. The total is 43 and a half. This is 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific in the morning on ESPN Plus, Disney Plus as toys. So that should be an interesting broadcast as well. And we have some luck ranking popping for this game as well. Talk to me about that.
Oh yeah, so the Jaguars are definitely the unlucky team in this matchup. It's only a luck differential of 17, but the luck gap is 45%. And usually we're looking for a matchup where it's over 50%, but once we get this part in the season, it's not as common. So yeah, the Jaguars are definitely the unlucky team in this matchup, and where I would lean against the spread. And well, there's no real home field advantage here. I feel like the Jaguars are making themselves comfy in London, so I think they do have a slight home field advantage here as well.
Yeah, and I'll speak to some of the the luck, which I think is driving that or driving some of those luck rankings when it comes to some of the players I like. But why don't you start us off? Who do you like in the captain spot?
Yeah, so there's a handful of options I like in this game. I'm going to go with Travis Etienne, though, just because ever since Tank Bigsby lost his fumble in week 1, it seems like his role has completely vanished, and Etienne has been the true workhorse back. Granted, it does seem like Tank is still getting the goal line work, which isn't too surprising. But, Etienne's dominating the early down work, dominating the receiving down work. And he's an explosive back who can score from anywhere on the field, so he doesn't necessarily need goal line carries to score touchdowns. Plus the Jags offense has been struggling quite a bit, but not Etienne. So this is a game they might lean on him even more, especially if they do get a lead. They are 3-point favorites. So I like going with Etienne in the captain slot here.
Yeah, I think the Jags should bounce back. I came into the season lower on the Jags than the market, so I'm not surprised. They've always been kind of inconsistent and just never have quite taken the next step yet. But I do think this is a good spot for the Jags to bounce back, and that's why I'm going with Trevor Lawrence in the captain spot, although I do think you could stack him with any of his receivers in the captain spot as well. But I do like Lawrence because I like the matchups for all of his receivers. And I think Trevor Lawrence is due for a monster breakout game. And, kind of speaking to that big luck gap and differential that you talked about, Trevor Lawrence leads the National Football League among quarterbacks with 9 drop passes by receivers. So, that's 3 per game. That's 3 completions per game. You're talking about now 20, 30, 40 yards per game could be added to his passing totals. I don't think people have noticed because of getting blown out by the Texans, and then the week before they don't even score 10 points. I don't think people have really noticed that Lawrence is actually playing pretty well. He is second in PFF passing grade behind only Tua Tagovailoa. He's third overall in quarterback grade behind Tua and Patrick Mahomes. And he's second in big time throws. And that kind of matches, what I've been seeing on the, watching him play. It's really been just kind of a lot of sloppiness all around them. You talk about the fumbles, the drops, and the special teams is giving up fullback touchdowns and block field goals. So there's just been a lot of things going wrong. I don't think Lawrence is really part of the problem, but this is a good matchup for him as well because Atlanta playing a lot of man coverage. Not quite as much as a team like the Giants, who we'll talk about a little later, but more than most. And that not only should provide good matchups for the receivers, and I tend to think Lawrence plays a little better against man when sometimes he gets confused by zone, or it's just things get a little weird against zone coverages. I think back to those Houston games with Lovie Smith last year, where I think the Jags scored in the first one they were 7 points or something like. But against man coverage, usually can pick his spots. He's going to have receivers that could win here, even without Zay Jones. And I do think Atlanta is starting to show some pass funnel tendencies. They're 10th in DVOA against the run. They do have that D line with Calais Campbell now on Yamada, so they have improved quietly. They're also not really giving up much through the air to running back. So Etienne, I like him because I do expect the Jaguars to kind of rebound and have a positive game script for once. But I do think they could build a lead with the passing game. And I think Lawrence can spread it to Ridley, to Ingram, and to Christian Kirk. So, like Lawrence in the captain spot here. Also, man coverage, if Atlanta continues to play, more man than average, that also helps scrambling because you got your defender's backs turned. So, Lawrence already averaging 20 yards a game on the ground. So, I think you could have a big game. Maybe you get to 300 yards passing. I could see 3 touchdowns here for Trevor Lawrence. So that's my captain for this London game.
Nice. Yeah, I would not be shocked if he bounces back and soon. I guess anytime you allow Andrew Beck to not only muff a kick, but return it 85 yards for a kickoff return touchdown, that's pretty bad luck. Or your special teams are just, a disaster. So I didn't know that Lawrence had 9 drop passes. Obviously, those aren't really his fault. Who's the main culprit? Is there a specific player that has most of those?
Only the guy in the revenge game of his life, Calvin Ridley. With four drop. I'll talk about him because I'm gonna talk about him for values. But I'll get all into that. But who you got for values?
Well, I'll go with the other Jags receiver then. I'll go with Christian Kirk. Just because, it seems like Zay Jones is going to miss. At least we're not expecting him to play this week. And Kirk is always going to get a pretty big boost when Zay Jones is out of the lineup now, because that means he's going to play in 2 wide receiver sets. That's kind of why I was down on him. I think it was after week 1 or 2. He was only averaging, around a 67% routes run rate because he's coming off the field now in 2 wide receiver sets. So now with Zay Jones out, he's going to see his routes run rate bump up, 15, 20%, full-time player. Also see a higher target share, with Zay Jones out of the lineup. So I like going with Christian Kirk here. Also goes with your theory of Trevor Lawrence bouncing back. I mean, he's playing well, so like Kirk here. And then on the Falcons side, really every pass catcher's a boom bust. So why not just go with the best one with Matt Collins? As of now, he has the most receiving yards for the Falcons right now. So I think he could be a bit overlooked on the 1 game slate. I wouldn't blame people for going with more talented pass catchers like Drake London or Kyle Pitts. But Matt Collins does have the highest ADOT on the team. So for a team that doesn't throw much, and when they do, they typically throw more downfield, he probably only needs a couple catches to really do some damage from his own team's perspective on this slate. So on the 1 game slate, absolutely sign me up for Matt Collins.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Matt Collins is a great play, and I don't think he lacks talent. I thought he actually showed very well last year, and that's kind of how he parlayed that season in Vegas, where I think he was people were kind of leaving him off the final roster projections, and next thing you know, he's starting and playing every single snap. Great blocker, great special teamer, but also turned into a pretty good receiver. And this Jags defense, they love to play zone coverage. So you got Atlanta's more of a man heavy defense this year, and you have the Jags more zone heavy. And Matt Collins is leading the Falcons right now in receiving yards against zone coverage with 105, according to PFF, 17.5 yards per reception. So, and 1.9 yards per route also leads the Falcons against zone coverage. So this is, I think Mike Collins is a great play in this spot. Calvin Ridley, already talked about him, but this is one of the pass catchers I want to stack with Lawrence. I'll obviously have some Ridley in the captain MVP spot as well, but I mentioned 4 drops on 25 targets. One of those targets was 26 yards downfield. So, that would have put his yards per route over 3 against man coverage. And I think he'll see some AJ Terrell, but I think he can beat AJ Terrell. I think Ridley's, he looked really good in week 1, and then he ran into the goalpost in week 2, and then the drops started coming. So I think it's a get right game for him, and they're going to force feed him early against this Falcon team. Like like number one, just because they need to get him back on track for the sake of this offense, but number two, because that's just what you do. I think the exit for him from the Falcons wasn't great. He felt like he needed to take a mental break and whatnot. So I'm sure that he's going to be highly motivated. I'm sure he's going to be in the game plan early and often. And again, if he catches those drops, his catch rate goes from 52%, which is, you're talking about DJ Chark territory, up to 68%, which is, nearing tight end territory. Yep. So just love the regression bounce back spot, love the revenge game spot. And this is just a very talented receiver going against a secondary that has been struggling. So love me some Calvin Ridley on the Jaguar side. And the Falcons, Jacksonville's a strong run defense, but I still got to go with Bijan Robinson here. And I like this slate because you can afford like multiple studs because you have Zay Jones out, and the Falcons are playing a guy who I know you're going to talk about in a bit, a lot more that's cheap as well. So there's a lot of cheap options. So, you can get like 4 studs in. So Bijan Robinson, I still think you want to include him in most builds, even if you're not putting him in the captain spot, because this Jacksonville team, again, they're playing zone at one of the highest rates in the league. And Robinson is tied for first in targets against zone coverage among running backs this season. And he's also tied for first in receptions, and he has 2 drops. So if he caught those 2 balls, he would be leading all running backs in catches, but he is first in yardage either way against zone coverage with 90 yards. And even though he had a down week against the Lions, the Falcons just kind of came out flat all around in that game. Low key, this could be just a blow up spot, because even though it's a tough matchup, the snap rate for Bijan, 63% in week 1, 72% in week 2, 81% in week 3. So his worst game, but his highest snap rate. Always like to buy guys like that in DFS, especially, studs who may be a little bit contrarian, but really like Robinson, whether you're putting him in the captain or not, because he's affordable this week coming off a bad game. And I think he's going to catch a ton of passes. So especially on DraftKings, really like him to fill out lineups. All right. What about dart throws? Where are you going?
So, I mentioned earlier that Tank Bigsby's still, apparently the goal line back. So I'm going to go with him as a dart throw because, he could punch one in for, 1-yard score and be a must play for this showdown slate. So there's also a chance, he does get out of the doghouse from his week 1 fumble at some point. So he's worth a flyer in lineups specifically that maybe aren't using Travis Etienne. I'm going to have some Tank Bigsby. And then for the Falcon side, Jonnu Smith, he has seen a pretty big role in this offense so far alongside Kyle Pitts. I mean, they could use 2 tight ends. Kyle Pitts is practically a receiver. So Jonnu's been averaging around a 70% routes run rate over the past 2 games and 7 targets per game over those past 2 games. So he is clearly, he's played for Arthur Smith before. So, that's the last time he thrived in fantasy football. So I think he's a sneaky play here. Like you mentioned, he's super cheap and definitely worth a look here. He might be, rostered highly, but it doesn't matter. Like he should be super chalky here. So go with Jonnu Smith.
Yeah. He might not be super high because again, there are so many cheap guys that you can play in this game. We should probably mention, even though, we just talked about Bigsby, we should probably mention that Dearness Johnson is also getting playing time in that backfield as well. Kind of like, who was it? Hasty last year.
Jermichael Hasty, yes.
Yeah, so that he's another guy, if you're going like 150 or just a bulk entering, I would probably put some Dearness there because it's probably going to be one or the other with those 2 guys behind ETN. And then you have all the Jaguars, three
Tyler
and
Algier for the Falcons side. I mean,
yeah, he's a little. I mean, he's more mid range, but yeah,
right.
Like the Falcons are just hilarious. But this is why you got to play DFS because like everybody who like only plays fantasy is just so pissed. Like Arthur Smith and Drake London and Kyle Pitts.
Yeah,
and it's like. Man, this is why we play DFS though, because we could just roster Jonnu Smith and Mac Hollins and the Falcons.
Yeah. Well, can't mean the people that complain about Drake London and Kyle Pitts being in this offense, but I definitely take your point.
Yeah, no, I mean, and listen, it's like Desmond Ridder, you're kind of scheming around him, so every defense is gonna wake up, and it's Bijan, but in the passing game, it's downfield, it's Pitts in London. So I kind of get why Arthur Smith is targeting these other guys because it's not like Desmond Ridder is going to fit the ball in tight windows to a covered London or Pitts. I mean, we saw the disaster with Mariota and Pitts like downfield last year. So it's unfortunate, but I get it. I do get it. What Arthur's doing, and he's got this team at 2-1. So can't knock it. But for dart throws, for me, I'm going Jamal Agnew on the Jaguar side. He ran a route on 63% of Trevor Lawrence's dropbacks in the absence of Zay Jones a week ago. Jones reportedly a long shot to play in this game, so I am projecting him to be out and expecting Agnew to run somewhere between 40 and 60% of the routes yet again. And he posted a 4-catch, 49-yard effort last week. Also had some kicks, some good kick returns, but he did fumble. So hopefully he doesn't do that this week. But I do like another guy I like against man coverage, which is why I like Lawrence so much. Agnew caught all 5 of his targets against man coverage last season, and 3 of them went for touchdowns. So this is a guy when if they get in the red zone inside that 10-yard line, sometimes they'll have a play or two schemed up for Agnew in space to try to make a guy miss and get in the end zone. So like Agnew, and you can also stack him with the Jags D because again, if the Jags get ahead, Ridder having to throw the ball. I mean, he had that comeback against Green Bay, and I am high on the Falcons, higher than most, but I think this is going to be a tough game for Atlanta. And on the Falcon side, if Cordero Patterson plays, if he makes his debut, which he's been questionable every week, and then he just gets
I keep waiting for it.
Right. But I mean, this is kind of the perfect time, right? Like early sleepy game, everyone's kind of waking up. If he's active, I feel like people probably still aren't going to roster him because it's like on the West Coast we have to get up at like 6:30. Well, we'll be up, but it's when the inactives will come out at probably like 5:30 a.m. West Coast time, 8:30 a.m. Eastern. So I think he'll be a sneaky play, and I mean he could step right into the number 3 wide receiver role on this team.
Wow, yeah.
If you think about it, but either way, if he makes his debut, I would think they'll have some type of gadgetry for him, just because he scored 6 points last week against the Lions. So I do think they're going to kind of get creative here. If he's active, obviously you'll have the threat of a return touchdown, and you could stack him with the Atlanta defense, that you're just kind of hoping for a return and maybe some more, turnover issues or special teams issues for the Jags. But you also get some leverage on, Bijan and Algier, because you never know exactly what's going to happen in this Arthur Smith offense, especially with a guy who can play in the backfield. So I like Patterson if he plays. If not, then Tim Jones is another option for the Jags. He ran around on 30% of the dropbacks. He'll be the number 4 wide receiver, so he's in play. But I'm going to go way off the board if Patterson's out and go Kadaro Hodge for the Falcons. His routes have been ticking up. 1 in week 1, 5 in week 2, 7 in week 3. He's overtaken at least for the moment Scott Miller for that number 3 wide receiver role. Last year he had 4 games with at least 2 catches and 33 receiving yards, and the Jags have allowed the second most schedule adjusted receiving yards per game to non-number 1 or number 2 wide receivers over 100. I'm guessing that's Tank Dell, who they're classifying as a non-number. I'm guessing that's why it's so high.
Yeah.
But either way, this Hodge is a guy, they'll scheme him something, but it's another one of those guys where the defense is going to be paying no attention to him if he's on the field. So in a slate like this, I think you could do worse. And he's like, there's going to be so many cheap options. He's one of the guys that's not going to be owned. I think he'll still come in, probably 5% or below. So
for sure.
Going Kadaro Hodge with my dart throw. We've been having some luck with these, so hopefully.
Yeah. No, I mean, especially with the Falcons. I mean, this is a game where there's like 8 to 10 legit, actual like quality skill players. So I would not be shocked if it's a Hodge, Scotty Miller, or like a Keith Smith.
Michael
Pruitt. Yeah, like 6:45 a.m. We're getting ready for the actual big slate of games. And it's just some like troll like that scores the first touchdown. That's usually how it goes.
Yeah. They also got John Fitzpatrick, but it's one word, but it's like capital F, capital P.
Yeah.
I don't think he's run a route yet, but
he's a monster though, right? He's gonna be like 7 feet tall. Definitely a red zone threat.
He's got to take over that Parker Hesse role from
6'7", 250. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Yeah. With these Falcons, I mean, if you're playing DFS with the Falcons, you got to know everybody because we know Arthur Smith. We know what kind of, and we also know he's good at scheming, like you said, in the red zone. So like it could really be anybody. But that's going to do it for the London game, which should be a fun slate. I'm actually looking forward to this just because it's so wide open.